Why does someone who once seemed so certain suddenly begin to hesitate before speaking? Why does a man who spent years appearing strong suddenly feel less sure of his image, yet somehow closer to something real? Why does he pull away from old habits, question the way he has been living, and feel genuinely disturbed by parts of himself he used to defend without blinking? Because there comes a point when the performance stops working, and that moment can feel deeply confusing, because from the outside it may not look like power at all. It can look like tension, like distance, like a man becoming quieter, more reflective, less interested in winning every argument, less eager to prove he is right, and more unsettled by the way he reacts when his pride is touched. More honest, in some way he cannot yet name, about the gap between who he presents himself to be and who he actually is when no one is watching. This is where Eckhart Tolle's teachings help us see what is really happening beneath the surface. Tolle understood that much of human life is lived through what he called the egoic self, the identity constructed from thought, from roles, from the accumulated story of me, the persona you build so the world will accept you, admire you, fear you, or leave you alone. But the longer you live through that constructed identity, the more disconnected you become from the deeper awareness beneath it. The stillness, the presence, the part of you that was there before the performance began. So when true awakening starts, it does not usually feel like becoming bigger. It feels like becoming less false. And that is why this process can feel so profoundly uncomfortable at first. You start hearing yourself more clearly. You notice the same excuses coming out of your mouth. You catch the same defensive reactions firing before you have had a chance to choose differently. You feel the emptiness of things that used to make you feel important. And the strangest part is this: the old identity still tries to run the show, but now you can see it happening. And once you can see it, you cannot fully go back. That is when the real shift begins, because the first sign of awakening is not confidence, it is confrontation. The first sign that something real is awakening in you is this: you stop defending your worst behaviors and start genuinely questioning them. This is enormous, because before any real inner change happens, the ego always has an explanation ready. It says you were just stressed. It says they pushed you too far, that your anger was honesty, that your distance was independence, that your cruelty was strength. But then something changes. You hear yourself giving the same excuse you have used for years, and suddenly it sounds hollow, not to others, to you. That moment matters more than most people realize. Tolle was precise about this. He said, choice begins the moment you disidentify from the mind and its conditioned patterns. The moment you become present. Nobody chooses dysfunction, conflict, pain. They happen because there is not enough presence to dissolve the past, not enough light to dispel the darkness. In other words, what you refuse to face will keep running your life, not as punishment, simply as the automatic continuation of an unconscious pattern. And awakening begins when that automaticity cracks open. When you stop asking who caused this in me and start asking, why do I keep becoming this version of myself? That question is painful, but it is sacred, because the moment you stop protecting the pattern, you finally have a chance to outgrow it. And once that starts happening, another sign appears that is even more revealing. The second sign is that you become less reactive and more aware in the space before the reaction. Something happens, somebody challenges you, you feel misunderstood, dismissed, disrespected, and the old version of you responds immediately. Defend, attack, shut down, withdraw, prove a point, end the conversation by force. But now there is something new, a pause. It may only last a second, but it is there. And inside that second, something is born that was not there before, because that pause means you are no longer fully identified with the wound. You are beginning to witness it rather than be consumed by it. Tolle described this process with great precision. He called it the recognition of the pain body, the accumulated weight of old emotional pain that lives inside every human being as an almost autonomous energy pattern. It feeds on negativity, on anger, on reactivity, on drama, and its entire survival depends on one thing: your unconscious identification with it. The moment you become aware of it, the moment you can feel it arising and recognize it for what it is, its power begins to dissolve. Not through suppression, not through fighting it, simply through the light of conscious presence. He wrote, the pain body is afraid of the light of your consciousness. It is afraid of being found out. Its survival depends on your unconscious identification with it. But if you bring the light of your awareness into the pain, you are no longer possessed by it. That pause before the reaction, that 1 second of space where you notice the anger before it becomes your voice, where you notice the fear before it disguises itself as control, that is not weakness. That is the beginning of genuine inner authority. And most people never develop it because they never learn to stop long enough to see what is happening inside them. The third sign is that the questions you once dismissed as irrelevant start showing up everywhere, not as ideas, as pressure. You feel it when a long day ends and the silence feels heavier than usual. You feel it after reaching a goal that was supposed to change everything, only to find the satisfaction fades almost almost immediately. You feel it when the life you built still functions perfectly on the outside, but something inside keeps whispering, this cannot be all there is. Before this stage, it is easy to live inside constant motion. You work, chase, fix, distract, achieve, perform, repeat. And as long as life stays loud enough, you can avoid the deeper questions. But once the awakening begins, the noise stops protecting you. The old satisfactions do not satisfy in the same way. The goals are still there, but now another voice enters the room and asks, why are you really doing any of this? Tolle understood this tension with extraordinary depth. He said that the ego's entire purpose is to seek, to want, to reach for the next thing that will finally make the self feel complete. But the seeking itself is the problem, because it operates on the assumption that you are lacking something right now, that you are insufficient as you are, and that assumption, that fundamental sense of not enough, is the source of almost all human suffering. He wrote, even if you achieve your outer purpose, it will never satisfy you if you haven't found your inner purpose, which is awakening, being present, being in alignment with life. So the questions start arising not to disturb you, to reorient you, away from the horizontal dimension of more and more and more toward the vertical dimension. The depth of this moment, the aliveness of right now, you become more drawn to reflection, to stillness, to conversations that would have made you uncomfortable before. That is not you becoming lost. That is you becoming reachable. And once those questions begin opening inside you, the next shift gets even more confronting. The fourth sign is that you stop pointing outward all the time and start looking inward with genuine honesty. This does not mean other people never hurt you. It means something much deeper changes. Your first instinct is no longer to scan the world for who to blame. Your first instinct becomes, why did this hit me so hard? And what is it touching in me? Tolle called this disidentifying from your mental positions. He described how the ego constantly projects outward what it cannot bear to face inwardly. You become obsessed with someone else's arrogance while being unconscious of your own hidden pride. You call others controlling while panicking the second life stops following your plans. You speak endlessly about their dishonesty while avoiding truths you do not want to say out loud about yourself. He said the pain body, which is the dark shadow cast by the ego, is actually afraid of the light of your consciousness. If you don't face it, you will be forced to relive it again and again. Not as punishment, as the simple, mechanical continuation of an unseen pattern. This is not shadow work as a concept. This is shadow work in real time. And it is not comfortable. The ego prefers outrage to self-examination. Outrage feels powerful. Reflection feels exposed. But real awakening begins the moment you become more interested in the pattern than in preserving your innocence. You stop asking, who ruined my peace? You start asking, why is my peace so easily stolen? That question is a turning point, because when you stop fighting your own reflection in everyone around you, you get your energy back. You stop spending years trying to correct other people into healing wounds that were always asking for your own attention. And that inner honesty opens the door to a form of strength the ego never understands. The fifth sign is that vulnerability begins to feel less like humiliation and more like truth. This is where many people get confused, because the egoic mask would rather be admired than understood. It would rather stay composed than be honest. It would rather say, I am fine, while anger leaks through the voice, distance fills the room, and the heart goes completely underground. Silence, sarcasm, detachment, superiority. These become the only available languages, because to feel is to be exposed, and to be exposed is to be weak. Or so the ego insists. But Tolle was direct about what this costs. He said that whatever you refuse to face does not become noble through suppression. It becomes distorted. It goes underground. And it continues to shape your behavior from a place you cannot see and therefore cannot change. The pain body, he said, grows stronger in the dark. It feeds on the energy of repression. Every emotion you push away, instead of meeting with presence, adds to its accumulated weight. Until the day something small triggers something enormous, and you find yourself reacting to a present moment situation with the full force of years of unprocessed pain. When vulnerability begins coming through in a grounded way, when you can say what is actually true even when it costs your image something, when you can admit that something hurts you, that fear is hiding beneath the control, that exhaustion is disguised as irritation, that is not weakness arriving, that is integration beginning. That is the pain body starting to dissolve in the light of honest awareness. And once that begins, the next stage is even deeper, because now it is not just your reactions changing, your whole sense of identity starts to shift. The sixth sign is that the inflation of the ego starts collapsing and something more authentic begins taking its place. Before real change happens, the ego often survives through performance. Big language, certainty, intensity, image. It talks like it has already arrived. It acts like it knows. It wants to appear powerful, evolved, untouchable, exceptional. But underneath all of that, there is often very little genuine depth, just the appearance of it. Tolle called this the ego's most sophisticated strategy. He said that the ego will even adopt the language of awakening in order to protect itself. It will speak about consciousness and presence and transformation while using those very words to reinforce its own sense of superiority. Now, the ego is not just special in the world's terms, it is spiritually special, more awake than others, further along the path, and that spiritual inflation, that claiming of depth that has not actually been lived, can be even more difficult to see through than ordinary pride. But eventually, the gap becomes impossible to ignore. You begin noticing the distance between what you say and how you actually live. You notice how easy it is to sound aware and how much harder it is to act with integrity in the quiet, unglamorous moments where no one is watching and no applause is possible. You notice that talking about growth is not growth, that appearing transformed is not the same as becoming real. Tolle said, presence cannot be performed, it can only be. The moment you try to look like you are present, you have already stepped out of presence into the performance of it. And that recognition, the moment you see the performance for what it is, can sting. But it is a clean kind of pain, the pain of illusion breaking, and what follows is something much more solid than image, quieter words, a life that gets stronger without needing to announce itself, less applause, less explaining, less need to be seen as something, and a growing commitment to becoming trustworthy in your own eyes. That is when the inflation collapses. And what rises in its place is not a better version of the ego. It is the beginning of character, of something real. The seventh sign is the one that surprises people most because it does not look like strength. It looks like softness, but it is the deepest strength of all. You find yourself drawn toward depth, toward beauty, toward emotional truth, toward what is genuinely alive rather than merely impressive. Tolle spoke about this dimension of human experience with great care. He described how the ego, in its constant pursuit of more, cuts people off from the very thing that makes life worth living. Not achievement, not recognition, but the simple, undeniable aliveness of genuine presence, the capacity to be moved by music, by silence, by a conversation that touches something real, by the light at the end of an ordinary afternoon, by another person's pain met without defense. He said most people treat the present moment as an obstacle. They want to get through it to get to the next thing. But the present moment is where life actually is. And the more present you are, the more you discover that what you were always searching for was not somewhere else. It was here. It was always here. You simply weren't still enough to feel it. When this shift happens, you become less attracted to what is loud and more drawn to what is alive. You do not want to dominate feeling anymore. You want to understand it. You do not want to outrun your own heart anymore. You want to be in genuine relationship with it, not because you have become less capable, but because you have become more whole. Tolle was clear about what this wholeness actually looks like. He said it is not permanent calm. It is not the absence of difficulty or the end of challenge. It is a different relationship with all of it. You can stay grounded without becoming rigid. You can feel deeply without losing yourself. You can be genuinely affected by life without being destroyed by it. Because you are no longer building your identity around avoidance, around the performance of being unmoved, around the pretense of needing nothing and fearing nothing. The man who has moved through these seven signs is not a man who feels nothing. He is a man who can face what is inside him without hiding behind power, performance, blame, or control. His strength has roots. His honesty is stronger than his image. He no longer needs to look whole because he is finally doing the actual work of becoming whole, not arriving somewhere perfect, returning to something real. And here is what Tolle said about this entire process that matters most. He said that awakening is not something you achieve. It is not a destination you reach after sufficient effort or sufficient suffering. It is what happens when the unconscious patterns that have been running your life are finally brought into the light of awareness. When you stop being the automatic continuation of everything that formed you and start being genuinely present to what is actually here, not the story about here, not the ego's interpretation of here, but the direct, unmediated, completely ordinary aliveness of right now, this breath, this moment, this quiet recognition that something is here that was always here, beneath the performance, beneath the image, beneath the accumulated weight of everything you were told you had to be. Tolle said it simply. He said, awakening is the end of seeking, the end of the seeker, and the recognition of that which is always already present. Not something gained, something recognized. The awareness that was here before the first defensive reaction of the day, the presence that exists beneath every role you have ever played, that is what is awakening in you. Not a better version of the ego, something deeper, something older, something that has never needed to prove itself to anyone. So now the question that matters, not for performance, not for the comments, but honestly, in the quiet of your own awareness, which of these seven signs is showing up in your life right now? And which one is the one you are still most afraid to look at directly? Leave one word in the comments, questioning if the first sign is alive in you, pausing if you are starting to catch yourself before the reaction, searching if the deeper questions are beginning willing to press through. Present, if something in you already recognizes what is being described here. Your word matters, not because it impresses anyone, but because naming what is true in you is the first act of bringing it into the light. And if you want to go deeper into these teachings, into what Eckhart Tolle discovered about the ego, the pain body, presence, and the hidden patterns that quietly shape your entire life, subscribe to Master's Podcast, because this is not the end of the conversation. It is where it actually begins. The moment you name the pattern is the moment you begin to live beyond it.